Amid the bustling streets of Paris, two lives about to intersect are on the threshold of an unexpected transformation. Clara, a dedicated young doctor but tired by the heavy routine of her hospital, and Gabriel, a successful businessman who seems to have it all, but carries an emptiness that not even he understands, meet after a car accident that changes their lives forever. In the vibrant and immortal setting of Paris, a chance encounter between two strangers sets off a series of events that will unearth secrets from the past, confront their own insecurities, and challenge everything they thought they knew about fate. In the premiere episode, the tension between opposites is palpable, and the viewer is taken on a journey where the improbable becomes possible. Accidents of Destiny is not only the beginning of a novel, but the opening of a new chapter for Clara and Gabriel, whose fates seem intertwined in a way that even they cannot explain. What seems to be a mere coincidence may be the beginning of something grandiose or destructive. The morning in Paris begins with the soft sound of bells in the distance and the buzz of the cobblestone streets that slowly awaken. In the heart of Montmartre, Clara Montero, a young 28-year-old doctor, opens the curtains of her small apartment. The view it has is breathtaking. Grey tin roofs, the tower of the Sacré-Cœur Basilica looming against the grey sky, and, in the background, a Paris that never rests. Clara's room is small and functional, with a desk full of medical books and post-its glued to a corkboard. His alarm clock rings for the third time, an insistent sound that seems to mock his accumulated exhaustion. She hangs it up but can't help but sigh. Another day in which he will have to fight against the clock, the traffic, the endless queues at the hospital, and above all, the growing weight of his loneliness. After a quick shower, Clara puts on a thick coat to face the November cold. The weather in Paris at this time of year seems to conspire against people who want a little comfort. Before leaving, she grabs her bag full of books, notebooks, and documents that need to be reviewed before her next shift. A cup of coffee is his only company as he walks through the streets, still wet by the early morning drizzle. The streets of Montmartre have a life of their own. Clara walks in a hurry, dodging the artists who begin to set up their easels and the tourists who get lost in the labyrinth of narrow streets. She knows these sidewalks well, but she never has time to appreciate them. There is always something more urgent to do. As she passes a bakery, the smell of fresh bread invades her senses, but Clara doesn't even slow down. A break now would mean an even longer delay. As she crosses the intersection near the Rue des Martyrs, Clara pulls out her phone and reads a message from her supervisor at the hospital. The boss requests a report on the cases that Clara followed the previous week. She rolls her eyes, thinking that not even the hours she spends at home are enough to handle everything. At the same time, on the other side of Paris, Gabriel Vasconcelos adjusts his tie in front of a full-length mirror in his luxurious apartment near Place Vendôme. He is the opposite of Clara in almost every way. While she struggles to survive each day, Gabriel lives surrounded by luxury and comfort. However, they both share something in common, the feeling that something essential is missing from their lives. Gabriel is the heir to one of the largest technology companies in France. He grew up in Paris, but his family has Brazilian origins, something he rarely mentions in his social circle. His brown eyes carry a weight that doesn't befit his age, and he rarely smiles, even when he's surrounded by people who do everything to please him. That day, Gabriel is late for an important meeting with investors. He takes the car keys and leaves the apartment, where his assistant Jean is already waiting for him with a folder full of documents. Jean tries to keep up with Gabriel's pace while talking about the details of the contract that needs to be signed, but the businessman seems oblivious. Gabriel's day is just beginning, but he already feels the weight of responsibilities. Paris traffic, as usual, is chaotic, and he mutters somewhat angrily as he speeds down a narrow street. His mind is torn between the meeting, the pressure to expand the company, and a void he can't explain. Meanwhile, Clara continues her walk to the hospital. She passes by a florist, where a couple chooses flowers with complicit smiles. Clara tries to ignore the twinge of melancholy she feels when she sees them. Love for her seems something distant, almost impossible to achieve in the midst of her exhausting routine. Arriving at the hospital, Clara puts on her lab coat and immerses herself in an environment she knows well. Hurried corridors, anxious patients and doctors trying to cope with the overload of work. It is there, in the midst of chaos, that she feels most useful, but also most exhausted. Your first task of the day is assisting with a complicated surgery, followed by endless hours of care in different sectors. Between one appointment and another, Clara remembers the message from her supervisor. She takes the reports she brought in her purse and begins to review them during a short interval. Her eyes sting with fatigue, but she has no choice. It is too late when Clara finally leaves the hospital. The sky is dark, and the city looks even colder than in the morning. She walks towards the taxi rank, holding her bag tightly as she tries to mentally organize her priorities for the next day. Meanwhile, Gabriel leaves his meeting with investors. He feels relieved to have finished the contract, but the feeling of emptiness remains. He decides to drive to Montmartre to unwind, something he rarely does, but which always helps him put his thoughts in order. Fate gets to work. Clara walks slowly down the Rue des Martyrs, her thoughts wandering through fatigue. The yellowish lights of the streetlights cast shadows on the storefronts, and the distant sound of an accordion song echoes through the streets. It's a typically Parisian setting, but for Clara, the romance of the city always seems to be out of reach. Your focus is just to get home, take off your shoes, and lie down for a few hours before the next shift. She approaches a busy crosswalk, where people in a hurry cross from one side to the other. The crowd around her envelops her in an uninterrupted stream, and Clara, distracted by trying to fit her phone back into her purse, doesn't realize that the signal for the cars is still open. At the same time, Gabriel drives down one of the adjacent streets. He adjusts the volume of the radio, trying to focus on the classical music that plays softly, but his phone vibrates on the dashboard. He quickly looks at the display and sees a message from Jean, who asks about the next steps of the contract. Gabriel lets out a sigh, picks up the phone and responds with a short message, without completely taking his eyes off the street. The intersection where Clara is approaching, and fate, like an invisible force, seems to conspire for the inevitable encounter. Gabriel, distracted, does not see Clara entering the crosswalk, while she, lost in her own thoughts, also does not notice the car that is quickly approaching. The sound of tires braking sharply cuts through the air, followed by a muffled impact. Clara is thrown a few meters forward, falling to the ground with a groan of pain. His bag opens, scattering papers and small objects across the street. The world around you seems to slow down, and the sounds of the city become a distant hum. Gabriel jumps out of the car, his heart racing. His mind, normally so controlled, panics as he runs up to Clara, who tries to get up, but feels intense pain in her ankle. He kneels next to her, his voice tense as he repeatedly asks if she's okay. Clara, still stunned, only mutters something inaudible. Gabriel looks around, noticing the curious looks of the pedestrians who begin to gather. He takes his cell phone out of his pocket and threatens to call an ambulance, but Clara finally finds his voice and firmly asks him not to. She insists that she is fine and tries to get up again, but the pain is evident in her expression. Gabriel ignores her objections and helps her sit on a nearby bench. He takes her bag and begins to collect the scattered papers, noticing the hospital's badge with the name Clara Montero. He looks up at her, intrigued, but asks no questions. Clara, in turn, tries to process what just happened. She looks at Gabriel for the first time, really watching him. He is tall, with striking features and an expression that mixes genuine concern with an almost arrogant rigidity. Still, there's something in her eyes that disarms her, an unexpected sincerity that makes her trust him even if against her will. After some effort, Gabriel convinces Clara to let him take her to the hospital. He insists that it is the least he can do after what happened, and despite being reluctant, Clara gives in. As he helps her into the car, she tries to ignore the awkward tension she feels between them. During the journey, the silence in the car is broken only by the sound of the engine and the slight hiss of the radio. Clara looks out the window, avoiding Gabriel's gaze, but feels that he watches her from time to time. When they arrive at the hospital, Gabriel escorts her to the front desk, where she finally convinces the attendants that she can handle the situation on her own. Before leaving, Gabriel hands Clara a business card, insisting that she look for him if she needs anything. She picks up the card without much intention of using it, but as he walks away, she can't help but stare at him once more. As Clara is taken to the triage, her thoughts are a mess. She tries to focus on what to say to her fellow doctors, but her mind keeps turning to the man she just met. Something about him intrigues her in a way she can't explain. Outside, Gabriel gets into the car, but doesn't leave immediately. He remains there for a few minutes, looking at the entrance to the hospital. There's something about Clara that moved him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. He tries to push away these thoughts as he starts the car, but as he drives through the illuminated streets of Paris, he realizes that this encounter has left a mark that he won't be able to ignore so easily. The hours advance in the hospital while Clara goes through the screening and X-ray process. Fortunately, the impact did not cause major damage, but his ankle suffered a sprain that will need rest and care. Sitting on the stretcher in one of the offices, she tries to organize her thoughts, but her mind insists on returning to the figure of Gabriel. Despite his initial reluctance, there's something about the way he behaved, his genuine concern, mixed with that touch of arrogance that won't leave his head. While a nurse applies a bandage to his ankle, Clara grabs Gabriel's card from her coat pocket. She runs her fingers over the name in gold letters, Gabriel Vasconcelos, accompanied by a minimalist logo that indicates a large technology company. She sighs, thinking about how different their lives must be. What could a man like him, clearly wealthy and influential, know about the challenges she faces on a daily basis? After being discharged, Clara insists on returning home alone, refusing help from worried colleagues. He walks with difficulty to the nearest taxi stand, leaning on a cane borrowed from the hospital. During the journey back to Montmartre, she tries to distract herself by looking out the car window. The lights of Paris flicker like small parallel universes, each illuminated window telling a story she will never know. When you arrive home, your small apartment seems quieter than ever. Clara leaves her purse on the floor and throws herself on the couch, exhausted. The cold night invades the environment through the poorly sealed windows, but she doesn't care. His hands still hold Gabriel's card as if they were unable to let go. Something inside her, an almost palpable intuition, makes her believe that this meeting was not just a fluke. Meanwhile, Gabriel arrives at his apartment near Place Vendôme. The space is impeccably decorated, but empty of life. He leaves his coat on the leather couch and walks to the kitchen, where he pours a glass of wine. His gaze falls on the window, from which the view of the city seems to extend infinitely. Gabriel tries to focus on an email June sent earlier, but his mind keeps coming back to Clara. He remembers the look on her face, the way she tried to keep her composure even after the accident. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, and it intrigued him more than he was willing to admit. That night, as Paris wraps herself in the cloak of darkness, Clara and Gabriel, in their respective worlds, think of each other. Both struggle with the idea that something as random as a traffic accident could be the beginning of something significant. But the doubt persists. In the days that follow, Clara tries to resume her routine in the hospital, even with the limitation caused by the sprained ankle. She avoids thinking about Gabriel, but small moments remind her of him. A conversation between patients about famous businessmen, the unexpected touch of a perfume similar to his in one of the corridors. Each memory is a small spark that rekindles the curiosity she tries to suppress. Gabriel, in turn, throws himself into work, trying to forget the incident. However, his mind keeps returning to Clara. He finds excuses to pass near the hospital where he left her, but never has the courage to enter. On one of these occasions, he parks the car across the street and observes the movement, hoping to see a glimpse of it, but does not find it. Fate, however, is not known for leaving loose ends. One night, while Clara is reviewing documents in the small cafe near her home, the same one where she usually seeks refuge in the midst of chaos, a familiar shadow enters the door. Gabriel, wearing a heavy coat and a distracted look, stops at the counter to order a coffee. Clara almost knocks over her cup at the sight of him. He notices it immediately. Their eyes meet, and for an instant, time seems to freeze. Gabriel hesitates, but then, with a faint smile that breaks the usual coldness of his expression, walks over to her desk. Clara feels her heart racing. He apologizes for the unexpected encounter, but admits that he hoped to see her again. Clara, not knowing how to answer, just invites him to sit down. The conversation starts hesitantly, but soon flows naturally. Gabriel talks a little about his company, while Clara shares stories of her routine at the hospital. Despite the obvious differences between them, there is a palpable connection in the air, something neither can ignore. As the night progresses, they both realize that this meeting, unlike the first, was something more than a coincidence. Clara feels that her life, so structured and predictable, may be about to change. Gabriel, in turn, finds a sense of lightness that he had long lost. When they finally say goodbye, Gabriel accompanies her to the door of the cafe. He offers to take her home, but Clara refuses, saying she lives nearby. As she walks away, Gabriel watches her disappear into the Parisian night, sensing that something important is beginning. Upon entering her apartment, Clara leans back against the door, trying to process what just happened. A part of her wants to protect herself, to avoid any involvement that could destabilize her life. But another, deeper and more instinctive part drives her to believe that maybe, just maybe, this is the beginning of something extraordinary. In the next chapter, Clara and Gabriel's paths will continue to cross, but the secrets and challenges that each carries can put this connection at risk. As the attraction grows, outside forces begin to conspire to tear them apart, testing the limits of chance and choice.